Hello, welcome back to Steel Bear Academy. My name is Jonathan. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Sig Sauer P220 in 45 ACP. First things first, we'll make sure we safety check our guns. I've already safety checked this off camera, but I'm doing it so that you guys know that I am handling a safe gun here. Well, as safe as a gun can be. So this is a Sig Sauer P220. This is the kind of original Sig Sauer P series classic type pistol, meaning this form factor. It's a double action, single action gun. This gun in its original form came out in around 1975 when the Swiss Army was looking for a replacement for their P10s, also made by Sig. And this gun was eventually adopted in 9mm, called the P75 for the Swiss Army. And we, I think, imported it under a Browning name, a Browning BDA. But this gun is in 45 ACP, and it's kind of the larger caliber Sig Sauer handgun. This gun can also be chambered in 10mm. It is a single stack magazine P-series gun. So this holds 8 rounds in this magazine, or you can get an extended magazine that holds 10 rounds. Sticks out like so. So it's a lower capacity Sig Sauer gun, and it's right in line with the 1911. If you had a 8 round magazine, it would be in line with the 1911 45, and so I think that it's a very worthwhile comparison. So we're going to be comparing it a lot to the 1911. Obviously, this is a single action only gun. This is a double action single action. For those of you who don't know, a double action single action means that when you take your mag, you shove it in the gun, you chamber your first round, the hammer is going to be back like this. You can then put it into, so this is called single action, meaning when you pull the trigger, it's far back like this. It's pretty light. You pull the trigger, bang. This is single action. Doing that same motion, you can insert your mag, chamber around. There's this lever over here called a decocker. If you push down on it, it puts the hammer into the double action mode. You see our trigger is all the way forward. Now it's a very heavy trigger pull that also pulls the hammer back. So the way you would carry this is you'd insert your mag, shove it in, chamber around, decock it, and then carry it like so. Therefore, your first shot is going to be double action. When you pull it out of the holster, bang, it fires. It then cycles, and it's now in single action for every shot after that until you're out of ammo, or you decide you're done shooting and you would decock it again, put it back into double action. So the double action is your safety. There is no manual safety on this gun. The double action is your safety. You have to deliberately want to pull the trigger to get this gun to fire in double action. It's a pretty heavy trigger pull. It's pretty long travel. So you're not going to accidentally pull this trigger. So that's what a double action, single action gun does. And this gun is available in single action only, where it would have a manual safety over here, much like a 1911. It's also available in a double action only, I believe, or at least it used to be. Probably not anymore, but used to be available in double action only and double action Kellerman, which is a variation on double action only. And I mentioned it's also available in 10mm. So this is, the big bore gun of the Sig line, and it's got some other cool features. I'm going to go through them, give you kind of an overview of this gun, and then I'm going to talk about kind of the pros and cons of this gun, what it would be used for, and why I picked it and why I chose to buy it. So first things first, just talk about kind of its construction. This is an aluminum framed gun, meaning this part down here, the frame is made of aluminum alloy, as opposed to steel on this 1911, is a steel framed, or polymer on this Glock 26. Is a polymer framed gun. So aluminum framed you would use this so that you can lighten up the gun, as opposed to having a steel framed gun. Aluminum is still a pretty darn strong material. The durability of aluminum is very good. So it's not like you should think of it as a lesser material. It is not as strong as steel, but it is lighter and it's rust resistant. It doesn't rust. It can't rust because that's not what aluminum does. It could pit though. So it's a lighter material, and so you've got a steel slide riding on an aluminum frame. You can see that this frame has a rail cut into it. And if you notice, this is not actually a true 1913 rail. It's actually kind of rounded on the slots here. So it's not exactly a true 1913 rail. And what that means is that while accessories do fit this gun, they don't fit it correctly. I don't know why Sig does this on some of their guns. They have moved away from this in their newer production guns, although they still have the proprietary rail on the 365, but on the 320 they have a true 1913 rail. On the Mark 25 and some of the combat guns, combat meaning that's a line of guns. We'll talk about variations too. It doesn't have a true 1913 rail, so it's just something to be aware of. Certain accessories will mar up the finish on the rails. Just something to be aware of. It does have a stainless steel slide, so the entire slide is stainless steel with a nitron coating. It used to be back in the day that they would have their slides made in a different way. They used to be made with like folding over steel and then welding it in certain spots with a breech block that would fit in right here. They don't do that anymore. These are the current production SIGs, and they are all made from stainless steel that is then milled out. This gun is kind of a full-size gun with I think it's like a 4.4 inch barrel. We have a metal guide rod here, it feels like. Pretty sure that's a metal guide rod. This gun does have night sights. These are Sig Light night sights. They come with the gun. This is a nitron gun. That's what they call this. This is a Sig Sauer P220 nitron. This is the California version, but it is essentially the same as any other nitron. There's nothing special really about a California version. Nitron means the coating. That's what they call this coating. It's black and it's covering the stainless steel slide. But nitron also just means the base model. So they have nitron is at the bottom. That's the lowest level of trim, if you will. It's from there, all these other names have additional things to it. They have everything the nitron has, plus other things. So they've also got the stainless guns, which I don't think they make anymore, but the stainless guns had a stainless steel frame. So they were obviously made of steel, and they were not made of aluminum, so they're heavier. Excuse me. There's also the Elites. The Elites, I don't know if they make any Elites in the 220, but I'll just kind of describe what that means. Elites generally have the swooped up beaver tail right here. So this piece right here would be accentuated right here, much more similar to this gun here. A much more dramatic beaver tail. That's usually the hallmark of an elite Sig Sauer gun. The Elites usually have some extra front strap serrations. This one just has vertical lines. It would have checkering on an Elite. The Elites also have the SRT trigger kit, which stands for Short Reset Trigger Kit. That just means that the trigger resets much sooner after you pull that shot. You pull a shot, bang, you cycle. Right there, that reset would be much sooner on an SRT gun, a short reset trigger gun. And I keep saying SRT kit because there's also something that Sig calls an SRT, a short reach trigger, which is actually referring to the trigger, not the internals, but this actual trigger shoe. they also use that same acronym SRT, short reach trigger. That means that the trigger would be thinner, therefore it would come back a little further, therefore shortening the trigger reach for your finger. So this is a standard trigger, and it fits my hand perfectly. This gun originally came with an SRT, a short reach trigger, but I took it out and replaced it with this standard trigger because this one feels much more comfortable to me, and it has another quirk of it that I'll cover a little bit later. To finish out talking about the models, there's the Equinox, which has kind of like certain parts of this are left stainless, so you can kind of have a two-tone look. There's the Combat, which has a true 1913 rail, and I think the Combat is the one that has the flat dark earth frame anodized, not Cerakoted, which is cool. And there are many other variants. You know, there's like the Extreme. I don't know if there's still such a thing. There's the Legion. There was a Blackwater edition. There's a Nightmare edition. There's tons of different names for all these different versions of this gun, but this is the base model. There's a couple things that I've changed on this gun, just as we'll kind of go over those real quick. Number one, we'll talk about the trigger. I replaced the short reach trigger with a standard trigger because for my fingers, when I am putting my finger on this trigger, if I have the short reach trigger, the fat of my finger here gets caught underneath and behind the trigger if I am holding it a certain way, the way that feels comfortable to me. So I found that if I pull my finger out and use just the pad of my finger, it doesn't really bother me, but that's not really how I shoot double action guns. I like to have this joint here is where I rest my finger on the trigger. There's some downsides to that, but the upside is that I get a lot more leverage and control of the heavier double action trigger pull. The downside is that I tend to move the gun more because I don't have as much, it's not as straight back when I pull the trigger. But I changed it to the standard trigger because I didn't want to have my fingers get pinched. I don't ever want to have to worry that my gun is going to hurt me and pinch my finger. The very first time I shot a 220 was a student's gun, and that exact thing happened to me. And I came home and I was like, man, why is my finger hurt? And I looked at my finger and I had like a big old blister on it. And I was like, whoa, didn't know that happened. And so I tried this gun with that trigger, and sure enough, that same thing happened. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm going to change out the trigger. So this is just called a standard trigger. This is nickel plated. You can get black ones if you want. This was just what was available, and kind of like the look, honestly. It's kind of cool to have the two-tone look. Some different grips came on this gun. The standard grips they're kind of like rough textured, hard plastic. They were fine. They were they kind of came to a point at the back here where the seam was. So on SIG guns, you can actually change these grip panels pretty easily. Normally they have two screws on each side. And so you have a ton of options for changing out the grips. These are what are called E2 grips. So E2 meaning, I think they're actually called E squared, but everyone pretty much calls them E2s. And the E2 grip is a one-piece grip, so it doesn't have screws. Instead, it's like a clamshell that's kind of shaped like this, and you put it over the gun and it kind of clamps into place and then holds like so. And it reduces the grip length right over here. So it requires a different like mainspring strut and mainspring strut housing, I think it's what it's called. I forget exactly what the names are, but the kit comes with these parts, and you have to replace those parts, and it makes it so that this dimension right here is further in, so therefore it reduces the trigger reach. Again, many double action guns don't fit a lot of people because in the double action mode, it's too far forward for their trigger to reach, their finger to reach. And that's actually kind of one of the problems that I felt when I had when I would shoot a 226, because the grips are thicker, because it's a double stack gun, this is a single stack gun, so the grip is therefore thinner, it would make it so that I couldn't reach the trigger very easily. Now these E2 grips help that significantly, and that is part of why I was able to put the standard trigger on and be comfortable for me. Because of the combination, the E2 grips plus the standard trigger, plus the thinness of a 220 meant I was able to easily reach the trigger on this gun. But there are many, many other types of grips available. The Hogue ones are very popular. Wood, G10, plastic. You can get all sorts of different types of grips for these. One of the reasons that I got this gun is because this is actually discontinued, the Nitron version. So the base model is discontinued. It's no longer part of the Sig Sauer catalog. Now, because in California we have some strange rules about what handguns we can buy, it is very possible that even though it's discontinued as far as the catalog goes, it's very possible that Sig may continue to make these for California just because we can't get other guns and because California, these are the only ones available to us. So it's possible you might still be able to get this model, but as far as the catalog goes, it is discontinued. So that's kind of why I wanted to get this now before it was gone. So if you were interested in getting a Nitron, then now's the time because it's going to be gone pretty soon. At least as far as the catalog goes. I talked about how this gun is kind of in the same, it should be considered in the same category as the 1911. For those of you who don't know, the 1911 is a single action only gun, so it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison. We're talking about two different types of handguns here. The 1911 is known for having like the best trigger that you can have basically on any gun. I think the only types of triggers that I think come close and are even better are revolver single action triggers, but those are not really usable quickly or in combat type guns. Those are more for target type stuff in single action. But the 1911 is known for having a incredible trigger, and so I want to try to give some comparisons between these two guns because they're both single stack guns. They both hold 8 rounds of 45. If you get a 1911 and 45, which most are, not all, but most, like a good number of them. So I want to compare these two head to head, even though they're obviously very different types of guns. For me, I've never really liked the 1911 that much as far as shooting it goes, or let's say using it for any like defensive purpose. It doesn't really excite me, and it's got some downsides that I just can't overlook. For one, I don't like pretty much any gun with a manual safety. This gun, most 1911s, in fact, I think every 1911 has a manual safety. So that's this lever here. You have to have the lever in the down position to fire. When you don't have it down, it won't fire. You have to pull the trigger and it will fire with the safety down, and you depress the grip safety. However, they're both in 45, so the comparison is obviously there. Now, I think I want to answer the question is, do I think this gun is as good as a 1911, or do I think it is better than a 1911? I don't want to say that it's better because they're so different that it's not really this gun is not trying to be a 1911, and a 1911 is not trying to be a Sig 220. They're not the same thing. But I will say that as far as would I prefer to have a 220 or would I prefer to have a 1911, for me, that is a no-brainer. I much prefer to have a 220. For me, it's all about how much I enjoy shooting it and would I actually use it for a important purpose other than just collecting it. So let's kind of talk about why I think this is better. Number one, I think the main reason I prefer this gun is because it's more comfortable to shoot. It has more muzzle flip than a 1911, I would say, because it's kind of a high bore axis gun, meaning you've got the barrel up here and your hand is down here. It creates the leverage point is higher, therefore it creates more muzzle flip. The gun flips up a lot more when you shoot this gun, as opposed to this gun. It's got a little bit more bore axis, or it's got a little higher bore axis on the 220. However, I think that despite the more muzzle flip, I feel like it has less felt recoil. And I think part of that might be the grips. It seems to distribute the recoil better into my hands on these E2 grips. And I think it's because, one, they're made of polymer, and two, because they've got more, like, there's more surface area versus the back of a 1911 is just this little piece right here and the grip safety. So I feel like it spreads the recoil out better on the 220. And for me, that's a big factor. I like a gun that is pleasant to shoot. And not to say the 1911 is not pleasant to shoot, it's just not as good, not as pleasant. And also, I'm comparing a 1911 with an extended beaver tail safety, and that actually allows this gun to be closer in the running to this gun. But if this was a standard GI grip safety, this gun would lose dramatically in terms of comfort of shooting, because the standard GI grip safety is just, it doesn't feel good to shoot. It smacks my hand and it makes my hand tired, and I don't like it. Now, you could just say that's a me problem. Well, fair enough. I don't really hear people complaining about that very much. So it's very possible it's just me, but that's okay. I'm the one who's doing the review. So I would say if you're someone who doesn't mind that, I think even then I still would prefer this gun. I like not having a manual safety on a gun. If this was going to be a defensive gun, you would carry it in double action mode. You'd pull it out of the holster, pull the trigger, bang, it fires, and then you've got the single action for every shot after that. I am more willing to accept the downsides of a DASA gun, meaning you've got two very different types of triggers. You've got a very heavy double action first pull, then a light single action after that. I am willing to accept the downside. The downside is that the first two trigger pulls are way different than each other, versus a 1911, every trigger pull is the same. It's always that nice, light, crisp, single action trigger pull. Very nice trigger pull. I would also point out that this single action is better than this single action. So that's something the 1911 has going for it. But I think that the single action on this gun it's very good. It's not as good as the 1911, and it's even not as good as some other double action single actions, but it's very good. I think it's like a 5.5 pound or so trigger pull, which is actually about the same as this particular 1911. But this one feels lighter, so perhaps this one's a little lighter. But they're different triggers, but I really am averse to single action guns with manual safeties, or I should say any gun with a manual safety. You might be curious, why is the Glock out here? Well, the Glock has a totally different system altogether. This is a striker fired gun, so it's kind of like a not very crisp single action gun with the travel of a double action gun, if that makes sense. So it's like, it kind of splits the difference. It's not a very well-defined, clean single action, but it is a very nice reset for one, and I will say that. But it's harder to hit at least for me, it's harder to hit with the Glocks, any striker-fired gun, than it is with any single-action gun, whether that's part of a DASA or it's part of a single-action only. So for me, I just much prefer the 220. That's my preference. I'm not saying that everyone needs to prefer it, but I just much prefer shooting this gun. I also think it has a much more ergonomic grip, by the way. And this also has way more options for changing the grips. Not in terms of like the raw number of options, but in terms of how much they change the feel and dimension of these. With the 1911, they're pretty much all the same. Like they all are basically the same grip. They just have different texture levels, different materials, but they're all the same shape, more or less. You can get thin, you can get extra thin, and you can get standard, but you can change the mainspring housing too, I suppose. But you can't really change like much of the feel. With these E2 grips or with the paneled sides, you can change the grips more. Now, you're not going to be able to change them as much as a revolver, particularly like a GP100 or some gun that doesn't have a backstrap, an exposed backstrap. True, but I feel like there's more options with this gun. Now, I want to give some scores because, it's not all just about my personal preference. I want to give some slightly more objective measurements or metrics to help you understand why you would like this gun or why you wouldn't like this gun. So first off, I want to talk about the trigger. I think I've already mentioned it, but it's a heavy double action trigger pull. So the first shot is it's heavy. It's heavier than I think it's heavier than most of my Smith & Wesson double action trigger pulls. I think most people talk about it being like 10 or 11 pounds. It requires a lot of effort, that first shot. That could be changed, I'm sure, with spring kits or, that kind of thing. I don't really have any interest in changing the triggers on the pull weights of most of my guns, unless it was like a strictly fun gun. But I'm perfectly fine with the double action being heavy. That's not really a problem. I think it is pretty smooth. Yeah, it's very smooth. There's not like lots of stages to it, and it doesn't change in variation of feel along this. You just increase the weight, you increase the pull weight, and bang, it fires. Single action, let's feel it. It has a lot of take up. I hit the wall, pulling through the wall. There's just a very slight little bit of creep in it, and then it has a nice clean break. And that little creep is far less noticeable than like a Glock, for example, where the creep is a lot of creep, and it's kind of mushy. I wouldn't describe this as mushy. It has like a slight little creep, and then it pulls. Versus the Glock kind of has like a bunch of little mushes that it pushes through. I would describe this, if I was going to give it a number out of 10, I'd give it a 7.5. It's good, but it's not amazing. The double action is not as smooth as, let's say, a Smith & Wesson revolver. And the single action is not as good as a 1911. So this is an area where the 1911 has a clear advantage over pretty much every other gun. Like the only exceptions are single action revolvers, I'd say. And perhaps, very nice rifles. But in handguns, the 1911 is kind of king. The 1911 has a very nice, it's got like a little tiny bit of take up, and bang, I didn't mean to fire it right there. It's a very light trigger pull. Take up the slack. Yeah, it's definitely better on a 1911, but I think that this type of gun gives you some advantages that the 1911 can't make up for with its better trigger. That's my opinion. I don't have an SRT in this gun, and I don't really know if I'm going to put one in this. I don't really think I want to or need to. It is noticeably, it's a noticeably faster reset with a SRT kit in it, but I don't know. I'll talk about why I don't know if I'm gonna put it in, but basically I'm not sure if this is gonna be a carry gun for me. I think I'm going to pick a different gun. We'll talk about why, but I'll tell you now. Basically the reason is just because 45 costs too much to shoot, and I like to shoot my gun, especially a carry gun, more frequently than 45 would allow me to shoot. I'd be able to shoot that, like a third as much for the same price. So unfortunately, this gun, because of its caliber, is probably not going to be the next carry gun for me, but I really like it. If it was a 9mm and it was, held more, a few more rounds, it'd be a 226, and then I'd definitely want to carry it. So I think I'm actually looking at getting a 226 or a 229 right now. Those are the next guns on my want to buy list for carrying. I didn't mention, because I don't usually talk about too many safety devices because they're ubiquitous nowadays in most guns, but I want to cover them real quickly. There's a few different safeties on this gun, despite not having a manual safety. Just like we talk about a Glock having safeties, it's a safe action gun. It's got safeties in it, but it doesn't have a manual safety. The safety that we're probably referring to most importantly is a firing pin block. And remember how I mentioned how it's got a lot of take-up? Whenever you have take-up on particularly a double action trigger, you're almost always getting rid of the firing pin block. That's usually what that take-up is. So what a firing pin block is, I'll show you on this gun. It's kind of easier to show you. A firing pin block is it's a mechanical, usually a plunger. It's that little circle right there. I can push on it. That little plunger is just preventing the firing pin from moving forward. So in order for you to fire the gun, this little plunger has to be moved out of the way. And on this gun, the thing that is moving it out of the way is this little ramp right here. So that little ramp, when you pull the trigger, is pushing up, and when it does, it moves the firing pin out of the block out of the way so that the firing pin can move forward. That is what makes a gun drop safe, usually. There's some other ways in which you could make a gun drop safe. Like, for example, this gun, instead of having a firing pin block, it has a super light titanium firing pin that can't easily hit the firing. It can't hit the primer with enough inertia and weight and energy to fire around, even through inertia. So that's kind of why that is one of the main reasons why they put in those firing pin blocks, is so that they can have a heavier, let's say, a spring on their firing pin, and not have to have such a heavy mainspring to hit that firing pin harder. It's another way of making it drop safe. It's not exactly truly like drop safe, if you will. This way is much better as far as like making sure that your firing pin doesn't hit your primer. It still could, in theory, hit it with the titanium firing pin, but it's just a different way of making it drop safe. The Sig Sauer does the same thing. I'll take this gun apart just because might as well. The way you take this gun apart is you make sure there's no ammo in it, make sure there's no round in the chamber. You're going to lock it open. You push up on that little tab there, pull the slide back, get it locked into that spot there. You're going to rotate this takedown lever to the down position, and now you're going to pull the slide off. You've got full length rails on these Sig Sauer Classic line pistols. So you've got these rails that extend the entire length of the frame, which is a claim to fame about why these guns are known for their accuracy. You'll notice that they're pretty wet. They're shiny from grease. These are one of the few guns that I think is pretty much necessary to run grease on, especially on the frame rails, in order to minimize wear on these aluminum frame rails riding on a steel slide. If you take a look here, we've got our firing pin block back here. So that's the main safety that makes this gun drop safe. Additionally, to put it back on, you just basically are going to put it back on the rails, lock it open, push this takedown lever back to the normal position, and then make sure your gun works. Additionally, you've got this like kind of half cock catching. It's like a little hammer catch. You see that I can't push the hammer down. It gets caught right there, right behind the firing pin. So this hammer won't hit the back of the firing pin unless the trigger is pulled to the rear. So if I pull the trigger, it fires. Once my trigger is back, now I can actually push it forward and it could hit the firing pin. But as soon as I release the trigger, it gets caught at that little like half cock, that little half notch cock. That's an additional safety, if you will. It's not super important to know those things, but these are all, little tidbits that I think contribute to enjoyment of the gun. So that's why I'm sharing them with you. Let's give it some more scores. For reliability, I give this a 10 out of 10. It has been 100% reliable, including with hollow points. I have no concerns about its reliability at all. For durability, I'd give this a 9 out of 10. It's got an incredible record for durability, partly because of the P226. So the 226 is basically this gun with a double stack magazine, so a thicker grip, and it's got it's chambered in 9mm or 40 or 357 Sig. So it's these smaller calibers, diameter wise, but it's basically the same gun. It has the same size slide. It has I think the frame is the same except for the grip. So it's basically the same gun. It's just in a different caliber. That gun, the 226, has enormous track record with law enforcement, military. The Navy SEALs are famous for using the 226 for a long time. Still, I think they still do, although they're moving toward Glock 19s as well. But it's got a really good track record, and it's pretty much analogous. It's pretty much ubiquitous with really good durability. Not to say other guns are not durable. This gun is just very durable. Boy, the 1911 has a very good record for durability as well, so don't think that this gun is the only game in town. Glock, forget about it. Glock has a great reputation for durability too. I'm just saying that the 220 and the 226 and all those P-series guns all have excellent reputations for durability. The reason I give it a 9 out of 10 is because it is an aluminum framed gun, and as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be important to keep those slide rails greased and try to minimize the wear on those, because this is kind of the main area where you're going to encounter wear, where the steel meets aluminum. For those of you who don't know, aluminum is a softer metal than steel, and so if you're rubbing steel on aluminum many times, it's going to wear through the coating. It's going to start wearing into the metal. So that's why you want to grease these up, or at the very minimum, keep them well oiled, and try to minimize the wear on them as much as you possibly can. So this is an area where I think grease is a very useful tool. There's a lot of people who don't think that grease they don't think that grease has a good place for guns. I don't want to go into it too much, but there's there's this famous company called Gray Guns. It's kind of like the custom shop, the Shelby version of Sig's. So Shelby is a very famous custom shop that takes factory Mustangs and soups them up and does their own thing and puts their name on it. Gray Guns is kind of the same way. Same thing with Cajun Gunworks for CZs. The Mr. Gray Gun, Mr. Gray himself, is kind of, as far as I'm concerned, he's like the expert on these types of guns. Sig Sauer's official manual says you could use a light grease or oil on these rails. Mr. Gray Gun suggests using grease on the rails and keeping them clean and keeping them well greased. And I'm going to go with that because it makes sense. I would want to minimize aluminum to steel wearing as best as possible. For shootability, I would give this a 7 out of 10. And I want to say the 7 out of 10 is for all guns, meaning every type of gun there is. The shootability, meaning the pleasantness of it, it's a 7 out of 10. But I will say between 45s, just between 1911s and CZ97s and Glock 21s and all the 45 caliber guns, USPs, I think that this gun gets a 10 out of 10. It's very pleasant. The recoil is really pleasant. It definitely has muzzle flip though, as I mentioned. That muzzle, if you're not holding real tight, even if you are holding tight, it's gonna pull you off target quite a bit. And it was especially obvious when I was trying this, hooking my finger on the front here. I could not hold on to this front of the trigger guard here doing this type of method. The gun recoiled and I had to readjust and find it every single time, versus holding it with the thumbs forward grip. I was able to get back on target much faster. So this type of grip didn't really work well for me with this gun. It had so much muzzle flip that I couldn't keep my finger there and had to find it over and over again. But it's very pleasant to shoot. It's got a very nice recoil impulse. When I had the other grips on it, it was not as nice, because they kind of came to a point here like that on the back of the grip. And I would imagine that any gun that comes to a point like this, as opposed to coming to kind of a soft point like so, would have more recoil. Felt recoil. So I definitely prefer shooting this gun over a 1911. So I said 7 out of 10 for shootability. It's still a 45. It's still got way more recoil than, a 9mm. You're definitely gonna feel it, and your gun is definitely gonna jump. So don't think that it's got the same recoil as a 9mm. It's significantly more, but it's not like it's more, but it's not like it's gonna hurt you or something. It's just got more. For value, Sig Sauer guns are really known for their high quality and their high expense. Their high costs, their high price, let's say. So I'd give this a 5 out of 10 for value. I think that this gun is incredibly well made. It's just beautiful. It's very, very finely fit. It's tight. It feels really good in hand, and it just screams quality to me. However, this gun does cost like $1,050 as of right now, so it is not a cheap gun by any means. However, it depends on what you are comparing it to. If you're comparing it to this gun, which is a Springfield loaded, this gun is also about $1,099, $1,050, basically the same price. However, this is kind of like upper bottom level 1911. So there are 1911s that are like $500. That's like the bottom price. And probably most 1911s hover somewhere between like $700 at the very low end of most, $700 to like, I don't know, $1,300, which the Sig Sauer falls into. Even the Legion series, I think, is still going to be, just a little bit above that. So when we compare this gun to a Glock, for example, a Glock 21, which is the 45 ACP version of this gun, it's a thicker gun, but you get the idea. It's the same look. When you compare this gun to that gun, well, the Glock is like $600 or $650 for the big boy Glocks, the 45 and the 10 millimeter. It's like $650. So you're talking about almost double the price, almost, depending on which 220 you get. So you're having to pay a lot more for this gun. And when you compare it to a Glock 21, for example, the value equation gets hard to justify the Sig. But I don't want to say that it's not it's unquestionably a very good quality gun. There's no question about that. To me, the question is, are there guns that are as good a quality in a much lower price range? And I think that answer is yes also. So I think the Glock 21 or the Glock 20 or 40 or 41 or whatever Glock and 45 you get, I think those guns are very good quality. I would even say they are just as good in terms of overall value they provide to you. However, again, they're not the same type of gun. Like, they're a polymer framed gun, and how you feel about your gun is partly, it's mostly subjective, really. Like, there's no question that both guns, the 21 and the 220, both have really good track records, and you would be incredibly well served by either of them. And they're both pretty much 100% reliable, and they're both really, really good. So the question is, can you get the same quality for less money? The answer is yes. With the Glock, I think you do. And they're not the only game in town. They just happen to be one that I have some experience with. So I guess the question is, is it worth it to pay the extra for the Sig? That's up to you. I think empirically, you don't have to. Like, empirically, you don't need to pay more than whatever is the lowest price, really good quality gun. And I think Glock is kind of it's not the only game in town, but it is, I think, a little above their competition for about the same price. But, there's an argument to be made for, cheaper, less expensive guns like the M&P and the CZ P10C and the Canic TP9 and that kind of thing. There are cheaper guns, less expensive guns, but I think the Glock has the track record that can warrant the little bit more in price, and I think the Glock represents the best track record for the price, let's say, versus this gun represents a higher price for as good a track record, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not saying your particular two guns will last at the same amount of time or that they'll wear the same or anything like that, but I'm just saying that 5 out of 10 for the value on this, it's really good, but it's just you can get just as good a guns for less money, if that makes sense. For carryability, I would say this gets like a 4 out of 10. It's a full-size gun. It's relatively thick. We'll compare it to the Glock here. It looks to me like it's just barely thicker than this Glock. When I looked up the widths for the 21, I think it said that this gun was still thicker. So I'm not sure exactly where they're measuring it, but to me, visually, it looks like this gun is even thinner than the Glock, but I don't think that's true. It's really, really close. The Glock is also kind of a thick boy. It's not a thin gun by any means either. But the 1911 definitely is thinner. But by how much? You know, it's definitely thinner, no doubt, but just a little bit. If thickness is a big factor for you, then the 1911 is thinner. You know, this is a full-size gun. It's kind of thick for a single stack gun. You know, it's only got 8 rounds. It's pretty darn heavy for a carry gun. It's 30.4 ounces. The 1911 is 39 ounces. A Glock 21 is 27 ounces. And the Glock 21 holds 13 rounds, I believe. So, yeah, it's not going to win any carryability records. But, you know, it's got an aluminum frame, so it's a little lighter than the 1911. But then again, gosh, what gun isn't lighter than the 1911? 4 out of 10, it's not an amazingly good carry gun for as far as the weight goes, as far as the carryability goes. I'm sure it's a great gun. If you decide to carry it, then gosh, you'll be very happy you did, I'm sure. But it's just, you know, it's a full-size gun. It's kind of hard to conceal. It's kind of thick if you're going to go inside the waistband. And it's kind of heavy. That's all I'll pretty much say on that. So here's my conclusion on this. I really love this gun. This gun, to me, is just, it's everything that I wish a 1911 could do for me as far as pleasure goes. It's just, I like this gun more than a 1911 in every regard, as far as I'm concerned. I like the looks of it better. I like the feel of it in my hands better. This polymer grip feels much better in my hands. It's got this nice texture on here. I just, as far as I'm concerned, the 1911 is a cool gun. It's, you know, it's iconic. It's, you know, it's legendary, if you will. It's been around a lot longer. And, you know, the 1911 is still being produced in droves, whereas, you know, the 220 is seeing less and less production. However, there's only one maker that makes a 220, and that's Sig Sauer, whereas pretty much everybody makes a 1911. I'll just reiterate that, you know, the ammo's expensive. It costs like 3 times the amount to shoot this gun as it would to shoot, you know, a Glock 17, which is my carry gun at the moment. But if you're in the market for just an absolutely amazing 45 ACP gun, this should be on your list. I think this gun is amazing, and everyone I know who's ever had one just loves this gun. And people who even have said that they didn't really like the 226, or they didn't like the thickness of the double stack guns, you know, that thinness can be a real game changer for somebody who doesn't really have the finger length to get that trigger pull on this gun. So this is a Sig 220. I think it's amazing, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. And if you're interested in getting a Sig 220, you better get on it, because they might not be around forever. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.